Hey tank mates, Wes with Divine Aquariums, bringing you another video on how to add CO2 to your aquarium. You guys probably saw my other video where I added the Fluval 95 gram to it. This time I'm not doing the Fluval again. This time I'm actually doing kind of a complete system. What I mean by that, actually have a CO2 tank and a little bit more controllable CO2 regulator. So you may ask yourself, why are we adding extra CO2 to this tank? Mainly this is my last tank that I have that it doesn't have actually CO2 on it. And that's just because I bought a whole bunch of Chem in bulk. So I was just trying to get rid of the rest of that, or use the rest of that into this tank, and then I was going to put the CO2 onto this tank. Because if I can just do it, if I could set it and forget it with this regulator in this tank, it's one less thing that I got to do. But it's also a more constant CO2 than just adding the CO2 to this tank, the liquid form. So kind of think about like this. CO2 is the basis of all life. Carbon, everything on this planet is made up of carbon in some way, shape, or form. Plants, by dry weight, are about around 40 to 50% carbon, so kind of keep that in mind. Photosynthesis, when the photosynthesis process that happens is actually using CO2 to create that photosynthesis process, meaning you have the light, it's also using the water, the oxygen in the water and the sugars inside of it, and it's also using CO2 as the whole photosynthesis process. But the one thing you got to remember is, as you're going through the day, because the photosynthesis is using the CO2 in the tank, the CO2 levels are actually depleting. They're going down. So what we do is, most people just put a CO2 tank on it, so it's pumping it on there, or pumping it in there, I should say. So you now have a steady level of CO2s. And if you watch any other person's video that has plants flourishing, then you'll notice they have CO2 on there because they have a steady, constant level of CO2. For instance, my crypt right here is doing great, but my Telanthera, it's not doing that well. Look at it there, and I had to cut some back here, but if you look right here, I've trimmed this one back a little bit. So my crypts are doing good, but my Telanthera isn't. And I just added some Lewickia in there. So kind of keep that in mind. We need a constant level, a steady level of CO2 during the photosynthesis process, so your plants can flourish. Not all plants like crypts, they don't need as much. At least that's what I'm thinking, because these things, if I show you a picture from a year ago where these plants are about that big, literally they were like this. They're also a root runner too. They root all over the place. They were about that big, and a year later, that's how big they get. And I've trimmed this back like 5 times in a year. So let's get down to what I'm using for this tank. First thing, I have a 2.5 pound CO2 food grade tank. You got to remember, if you go to a air gas supply store, which that's where I got this one at, you need food grade. It is pure CO2, that there's no contaminants in it. I talk for a living, keep that in mind. So you got to have a food grade style CO2 tank. I got the 2.5 pound because he was all out of 5 pound, and I didn't want to lug around a 10 pound or a 20 pound. Actually, 20 pound is just way too much. 20 pound on this 55 gallon will probably last probably 4 or 5 years, really. My dog's trying to make a cameo again. Willow, quiet. So I bought the 2.5 pound. The cool thing about going to an air gas supply store is it's like a propane exchange. So the first initial price is to actually buy the tank itself. So kind of keep that in mind. So for instance, this tank was $79.99. But when it's empty, and that's what a free refill. But when it's empty, I take it back to it, and it's only $16 to refill this. So kind of keep that in mind. And then it's $20 to fill if it was a 5 pound. I believe the 5 pound was $108 or $96 or something like that. But then it would be $22 to actually fill it. So, but this 2.5 pound, believe it or not, it's probably going to last me almost 9 months, probably 9 months to a year. So you get your tank, you get yourself a nice regulator. What I do is I recommend going online and looking at CO2 regulators for aquariums reviews. And how I came up with this one, this is actually by Double Sun. And the reason why I bought this one is because this one keeps coming up over and over and over again. The other reason why I bought it is because it has a high side and a low side. Talking about air conditioning stuff, sorry. That's the technician inside of me. Not a high side and low side. One's for the tank, the other one is for what's actually going into the tank. So if I remember correctly, I think this one is for the tank. This one will tell me if it's getting low or not because the PSI will get low. This one tells me what's going into the tank. The other reason why I bought it, the bubble counter is already attached to it. And also, it's a lot easier to add the water because this is sitting upright, right? The other thing, or another reason why I bought it, it has electronical valve on it. So I'm going to actually plug this into a timer and only have it come on from like around 7 a.m. to about probably 3 or 4 p.m. That way I'm not wasting CO2 during the night. You need to cut your CO2 off just like your lights, because you need to let the plants rest and use all that to grow. So you want to cut that off at night. Otherwise you're just wasting CO2, like I am at the tank at the other house or at my work. This one doesn't have an electrical on and off switch, so it's constantly pumping in. So kind of keep that in mind. So this one's done by Double Sun. I'm gonna try it out, but I've heard a lot of reviews about it. So the other thing you need is some type of emitter, whether it's Fluval or Bayou. You got to have some type of emitter in there to actually push the CO2 micro bubbles out. Another thing that you need is actually CO2 grade tubing, or this is actually called CO2 proof tubing. So this won't seep out any type of CO2, where if you just use regular silicone hose, it's going to seep out a little bit, and most likely if it's not actually silicone, just a regular rubber hose, it's probably just going to keep blowing off because it can't handle the pressure. You can use a regular check valve, but you'll be replacing them every few years because it just over time, just the constant pressure from this tank going in is just going to break them. But for $7, you can get a nice metal one that's actually designed for CO2. Again, this was $10. This was $7. And you get 16 feet. This is done by Aquatech, which is another good brand if you've been out there. And then of course I have one of these U-shaped things to go over the tank. Makes it a little bit easier. That way there's no kinks, no flat spots. And then the last thing is you need a Fluval. Well, you don't need a Fluval. You just need a CO2 checker that's going to constantly measure the CO2 levels in this tank. If you watched my upgrading my Fluval CO2 video, then you know a couple things about this. But if you haven't, Fluval says the first thing that'll happen is once you put the 1 ml of solution in, you'll put it in. It takes about 10 days to actually start registering correctly. The other thing you want to do is you want to put this checker on the opposite side. So for instance, I'm going to put my emitter on this side of the tank. I'm going to put the checker on that side of the tank right here. So it's going to go on this side. That way, when all the CO2 is pushed all through and it finally gets over here, I'm going to get an accurate reading because it's furthest away. As soon as you get it, if you put them too close together, it's not going to read accurately because it's only going to read that section. But this will be a good reading of the whole tank because the bubbles will actually be pushed over through my Sun outtake and the bubbles coming up from my air stones. So kind of keep that in mind. So now that I went over the products that I have, let's actually get to it. Let's start putting this thing on the tank, all right? All right, let's connect this regulator. It's going to go on like so. Get a little tape. This is to prevent any seals from leaks from happening. That's not good. There we go. First thing, start with hand. The cool thing is there's a little gasket inside here, and they actually give you a spare gasket. Another reason why I bought Double Sun. So let's stick this on, and get it on hand tight as much as possible. Now this doesn't need to be space shuttle tight, so just give it one good quarter turn. There you go. And that should be it. It backed off just a little bit. So there we go. So that's what it looks like. It's going to sit right here. So now we take this top off and we fill this about 2/3 of the way. So let me go get a little cup. That may be a little bit too much. So that's about half. We'll start with that. Next we get our hose. So, if you're wondering, this hose is a little bit harder. Let me get it out here. There we go. Compared to, hold on, let me do it. So, here's the soft silicone hose compared to a little bit firmer hose. so it's a little bit harder. So don't, with this harder hose, normally you can cut this with a knife or a pair of scissors. You don't want to do that with this silicone style, or not silicone, this CO2 hose. You actually want to use a razor blade, because if you use scissors, it'll kind of square it off and pinch it, and then you might get some, you may not get a good seal. So we'll stick that through, put this back on top. There we go. And get this out of the way. Good. All right. Now we got, I don't know how long I'm gonna, how much I'm gonna use, so I just left it completely on. Another reason why I want to do that is because right here is my outlet, or my outlet strip, I should say. So basically, it's gonna sit like that. So when I open it up, actually, I'm in at work, and I need new batteries there. So when I open it up, I can count the bubbles, and I'd be able to see the pressure. So now that we did the tubing, that's a pretty nice suction cup. I think I will use that. Definitely want to get the check valve out. All right. Pretty self-explanatory. Goes that way into the tank. So let me readjust my camera, and we'll start putting this into the tank. So first things first, leave enough slack so you can actually, see, there we go. So you can actually pull your tank out and actually work with it. So leave slack there, and then leave some slack basically right here. This is 16 feet, as you can see. So kind of keep that in mind. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull some down. You never know. Actually, I'm gonna try to, I'm not gonna cut anything just yet. I'm going to, well, actually, I'm gonna have to cut something. So let me go back to that. Gotta put my check valve in. So I went back a few more feet, and now I'm gonna cut about right there, because you want your check valve about right there. So I'll pull back up. There we go. While I'm here, I'll wet the end so it goes on a little bit better. There we go. I don't want to keep walking in front of the camera. Yeah, I gotta fix that. So I'm gonna stick it here, about right there. Have it come in about right there. Probably move this piece so when the bubbles come up, the Sunsun outtake will push it through. So let's see what I have left here. That's Wet that end. There we go. Stick that in there. And put about, let's say maybe about that much. So I'll cut that end with the razor blade too. Wet that end. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna cut in front of it. So remove that, and move this one. I don't want to get sprayed, so I'm gonna cut my air pumps off. Come down. There we go. Actually, let me do it this way. Actually, while I'm here, go ahead and grab that. Sorry, guys. Grab my towel, and there we go. The one thing I forgot to do was use that, but I'll just get a regular, actually, oop, did not work. Let's try it again. So, when I was reading the directions, Double Sun recommended that you actually first power on, then turn the gas on, which is important, and then adjust the bubble micron adjuster valve. So let me plug this in first, and then I'll turn the tank on, and then we'll start adjusting. All right. Any second now. Hopefully. Usually if bubbles don't come out, you don't have enough water in, or too much water. There we go. Slow and steady. You want to turn it on, get some bubbles going, and then slowly back it down. Usually, once you get that stream going, you know, so what you'll get that going about 1 to 3, I'm sorry, 1 bubble per 3 to 4 seconds, and then check your CO2 checker. So we're going to do that next. All right, now we're going to do our CO2 checker. This is actually very simple. I started with the Fluval. I was going to use this one, but we'll use the Fluval first. Now we'll go to the Fluval checker. Very simple. Oops. You put this on the outside. Put this on the outside of the tank. And then that's where you would put this on the inside, basically like this. And then basically all this is a pH checker. You know what yellow means, you know what blue means, you know green means. So every 14 days, you'll have to pour the stuff out, put a new one in. Remember, it takes about 10 days for it to register or read correctly, they said. So, their first initial, there we go. I always shake it up a little bit. Let's see if I can get a line here. See if I can get it clear. You fill to that line. Sometimes the gasket doesn't want to go on right. Double check that. The gasket moved a little bit. There we go. I don't like how it moved. There we go. Not a fan of that, but it should still seal. Actually, I would put that on the bottom. Now we come over here. We'll move some stuff, mainly my tops. And we will put it right, say about right here. Now, we'll put this on the outside. And there you go. Very simple. There's my checker. Again, it'll take about 10 days for that to read properly. Then we'll come over here. I'm going to adjust that probably 1 bubble every 3 seconds. Maybe, actually I'll probably do 1 bubble every 4 seconds just to help that thing register. And then now, well, there's my angel. Sorry, bud. There it is. So follow these bubbles all the way up. And now they're getting spread throughout the tank. So that's how you add a CO2 kit. Once again, thanks for watching.